Madam Chair, we're now live.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk, and welcome everybody to our Community Affairs and Planning Committee meeting this evening. Due to COVID-19 emergency declaration, this meeting of the Community Affairs and Planning Committee is being held electronically and live streamed on the town's website. All members of council and staff in attendance are participating by audio and video teleconference. For members of the public watching from home, please bear with us if we encounter any technical difficulties throughout the meeting. Thank you. Just trying to fix my technical difficulty here. Okay, so I'm going to call this meeting to order. Is there any disclosure of pecuniary interest? And if there is, you have to shout because I can't see all of you this evening. Okay. So can I have a mover for the adoption of the minutes from October the 5th?
Con. Lee.
Thank you. All in favor? Any opposed? I appreciate that. So we have our regular meeting this evening, our public meeting this evening with regard to the development charge bylaw amendment. It's number 4.1 on your agenda. So I'll hand that over to the person, Dana, who's doing that. And you should have an attachment with the presentation on it.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This is Diane Valentin, the Director of Finance. We have Sean Michael Steven here from Watson and Associate Economists Limited, who will be running this public meeting on our behalf.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So next slide, please. So the intent of the meeting today, of the public meeting, is to provide an overview of the proposed development charge bylaw amendment that is to come into effect on January 1st of next year. The public meeting is a statutory requirement of the Development Charges Act when amending a bylaw, and as required by the Development Charges Act, the background study as it pertains to the development charges bylaw amendment has been placed on the town's website at least 2 weeks in advance of this public meeting and 60 days in advance of the anticipated date of bylaw passage being next week, December 14th, with the required public notice having been given of the public meeting as well. Next slide, please. The amendment and the background that's been prepared pertaining to that amendment of the current development charge bylaw number 50-2018 is in relation to changes to the Development Charges Act that have come into force through the More Homes, More Choice Act, and then more recently the COVID-19 Economic Recovery Act. Those changes coming into effect as late as September 18th of this year. The changes or the amendments to the bylaw as a result of the changes to the legislation are related to changes to the development charge recoverable costs included in the calculation of the charge, as the 10% statutory deduction is no longer required for services included in the town's bylaw, such as parks and recreation, library, and growth-related studies. And as well, there have been changes to the policies related to the timing and calculation and collection of development charges, as well as statutory exemptions through those amendments to the Development Charges Act. The other item that the bylaw amendment pertains to is the revision of the non-statutory development charge exemptions to remove the exemption policies for development within the community improvement areas. All other aspects of the 2018 background study, as well as bylaw 50-2018, would remain unchanged. Next slide, please. In terms of the changes to the development charge recoverable cost from the removal of the 10% statutory deduction, in aggregate, it would add about $3.3 million to the development charge calculation across the three respective services, being parks and recreation, with a $2.6 million increase in the development charge recoverable costs, $620,000 increase for library services, and a $67,000 increase roughly for growth-related studies. Next slide, please. The schedule of the calculated charges are presented here in 2018 dollars, being the base year for which the background study and bylaw were prepared in, and the charges continue to be imposed for the same services, as well as the same types of development, being single and semi-detached dwellings, other multiples, 2-bedroom and greater apartment dwelling units, as well as 1-bedroom and bachelor apartment units on the residential side, and then by uniform square foot of gross floor area in terms of non-residential development. Next slide, please. Comparing those charges indexed to 2020 values to the current charges that are imposed within the town, we see that across the 5 service areas, the charge that would be imposed would be $28,281 compared to a current charge per single and semi-detached dwelling unit of $27,039, an increase of roughly 4.5% pertaining to that removal of the 10% deduction. And on the non-residential side, an increase of roughly 0.1%, or an increase of 1 cent per square foot of gross floor area, as the services for which the removal of the 10% deduction relates to are of a primarily residential benefit, so there's less of an impact on a non-residential charge. Next slide, please. So to assess the impact of the changes in the town's development charge policy on the total development charges that would be payable within the town, including the Region of Durham development charges, as well as education development charges, that 4.5% increase in the charge would represent less than a 2% increase in the overall development charges payable, and would not change the town's relative position in comparison to other Greater Toronto Area municipalities, just slightly above that of Oshawa and below that of Halton Hills, Milton, and Oakville within Halton Region. Next slide, please. The impacts for non-residential development are obviously much more nominal, as the increase in the town's charge is only 0.1%. So the change to the overall charge within the region is less than that, still maintaining the relatively strong competitive position of the town towards the bottom end of the comparison. Next slide, please. And similarly for industrial non-residential development, the relative position of the town for education, regional, and town DCs does not change with the increase in the calculated charge. Next slide, please. As mentioned in the introductory comments, except for the specific areas of the amendment, all other policies of the current bylaw will remain unchanged. The changes to the collection and calculation of and timing of calculation of development charges that came into effect on January 1st of this year with the More Homes, More Choice Act, and which have been in effect since that time, are that rental housing and institutional developments are required to pay their development charges in 6 equal annual payments commencing from the date of occupancy, and then that installment provisions extended to 21 equal annual payments for nonprofit housing, again commencing from the date of occupancy. In terms of the timing of when development charges are calculated, what is currently or previously provided in the town's bylaws that development charges are calculated and payable at the time of building permit issuance. With the amendments to the Act for developments now proceeding through the site plan or zoning bylaw amendment processes, those charges will be determined on the date of the planning application and will be frozen at that rate until building permit issuance, as long as that building permit is issued within 2 years of the approval of the planning application. And again, those policies having been in effect since January 1st of this year, but are being included in this bylaw amendment for consistency. The town has also passed a development charge interest rate policy pertaining to those installment payments, as well as the charges being frozen at planning application receipt under Town of Ajax policy COR-148, in which interest will be charged at the Bank of Canada rate plus 2%. Next slide, please. And one of the other changes that came into effect with the Bill 197 coming into force on September 18th this year are changes to the statutory exemptions to the payment of development charges, which again are being reflected in this bylaw for consistency, although they are already in effect. And so for residential intensification, where previously you could add up to 2 additional apartment units within a single detached home, or 1 additional apartment unit within medium or high density residential developments without the payment of development charges, that exemption policy has now been extended to apply to ancillary structures as well as new apartments within the existing residential building. And as well, the creation of second dwelling units within certain prescribed classes of new residential buildings will also be exempt, as well as second dwelling units within ancillary structures to those new residential dwellings. Next slide, please. Then the non-statutory exemptions that are imposed in the current bylaw are proposed to be amended as such that the current full and partial exemptions for qualifying office, commercial, and residential development within either the downtown or Pickering Village community improvement areas will no longer be in effect, as has been directed by council previously. The removal of this exemption, thereby removing the financial obligation of the town to fund the foregone revenue from tax-based sources. The next slide, please. Then the next steps in the study process for the development charge bylaw amendment are for council to receive input from the public within this public process and consider any further amendments to the development charge update, study, and amending bylaw before considering the study and bylaw for approval and adoption at the December 14th council meeting, with the anticipated date of the amending bylaw coming into force to be January 1st, 2021. That does conclude the presentation.
You're on mute, Joanne.
Thank you. Just want to check with the clerk. Did we receive any correspondence or comments on the DC bylaw?
Madam Chair, no correspondence was received.
Thank you. So do we have any questions from council? None? Okay, thank you very much for your presentation. You obviously did a good job on this, and we appreciate you coming this evening for this. I know we've been working on it for quite some time.
You're very welcome.
So
Have a good
thank
evening.
you. So I need a mover. Do you want me to read the motion?
Sure.
So that council adopt the consolidated 2018 development charge background study amendment dated December 1st, 2020, as set out in attachment 4 of the report, that based on the public input received by the town pursuant to section 12(3) of the Development Charges Act, council determined no further public meeting is required. And 3, that the proposed bylaw to amend the town's current development charge bylaw attached to this report be approved by council, and 4, that upon final approval of the proposed bylaw, the development charge exemption reduction program in both the Downtown Community Improvement Plan and the Pickering Village Community Improvement Plan be suspended. Are there any comments?
I'm
Okay,
happy
can
to
I-
move that, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Could I have a seconder?
Lisa?
I got Rob first.
Okay.
Anybody opposed? Okay, thank you very much. So we're going to move on then to 4.2 on the agenda, which is the zoning bylaw amendment application for Annandale Park Developments Limited on Church Street. And again, Mr. Clerk, I'm just going to ask you if we had any correspondence or comments and questions from the public on this issue.
Madam Chair, yes, 2 voice messages were received as well as 2 written items of correspondence.
Thank you. And we did receive the correspondence. Everybody did, if I'm correct on that. Thank you.
Through the chair, that's correct. All items were circulated to members of the committee.
Okay, thank you. So I'll hand this over then to staff who are doing the presentation on this. So I'm not sure who's doing this presentation.
That will be me. It's Caitlin Grope.
Oh,
Senior
hi.
Planner with the town.
Thank you,
Just
Grope.
waiting for the PowerPoint presentation to be pulled up.
Great, thank you.
All right. Good evening, Madam Chair and members of council. My name is Caitlin Grope. I'm the planner responsible for zoning bylaw amendment application Z2/19 submitted by Annandale Park Developments Limited. Tonight's presentation will provide a summary of the application and how it has evolved to the proposed zoning bylaw amendment presented tonight, an overview of how the application achieves the planning direction framework as set out by the province, the region, and the town of Ajax, a summary of the public consultation and comments received on the application, and how the comments have been addressed. The subject lands are located at 221 Church Street South and encompass an area of approximately 58 hectares or 144 acres. There's an existing golf course, a clubhouse, and curling rink located on the subject lands. To the north is the CN Railway and Highway 401. To the immediate east are the environmentally protected lands, including Duffins Creek, which are owned by the Toronto and Region Conservation Authority, or the TRCA. Further east, along Westney Road South, are existing employment lands, including the GO Transit Station mixed-use area and Prestige employment lands. To the south of the subject lands is Bailey Street West, and across Bailey Street West are existing Prestige employment and general employment lands, and environmentally protected lands also owned by the TRCA. To the west of the property is Church Street South, and across Church Street South is the City of Pickering and the Durham Live development, which is currently under construction. This development includes a casino and hotel, among other entertainment and tourism uses. On March 20th, 2019, Annandale Park Developments Limited submitted zoning bylaw amendment application Z219 to the town. On November 16th, 2020, a joint resubmission was received from Annandale Park Developments Limited and Crestpoint Real Estate Investments Limited. A formal site plan application has not been received by the town at this time. Any future development in accordance with the conceptual site plan or otherwise would require approval through the appropriate Planning Act application, either through a site plan application or draft plan of subdivision, and the necessary supporting studies and reports. The original application that was submitted in March 2019 proposed to rezone portions of the land from golf facility and Prestige employment to a Prestige employment exception zone. The applicant was also seeking additional use permissions and performance standards through a proposed exception, including convention or conference center uses, cinema, business support services, spa services, and bake shop, among others. Many of these uses are already permitted in the Prestige employment zone. The March 2019 application was informed by the following reports and studies: a planning rationale report, environmental impact study, natural heritage features screening and delineation report, fluvio geomorphological and meander belt width assessment, a functional servicing report, preliminary geotechnical investigation and slope stability study, a phase 1 and phase 2 environmental site assessment, and a hydrogeological investigation. An addendum letter to the hydrogeological investigation, a revised planning rationale report, and a revised environmental impact study were provided with the November 2020 resubmission. The application and supporting studies and reports were circulated to internal departments and external agencies, including Durham Region, the TRCA, and the City of Pickering. A public open house was held on February 20th, 2020 in council chambers at Town Hall, which approximately 20 members of the public attended. The principal concerns that were raised were in regards to the closure of the Annandale Curling Club. No concerns raised or comments were made on the zoning bylaw amendment application. The comments received from external agencies, including the Region, TRCA, and Pickering, have been addressed in the staff report and through the proposed holding provisions and a site-specific exception in the zoning bylaw amendment. The town has also received 2 oral submissions on this application. One was asking whether the town has fulfilled their duty to consult with Indigenous communities. Staff note that through the last official plan review, OPA 38, expanded the environmental protection land use designation on the subject lands. Indigenous communities were consulted through this review and did not have any comments. The zoning bylaw amendment implements the official plan land use designations on this property. The second oral submission was supportive of the town's thoroughness of the review of the application and appreciative of the background reports and studies completed. They also commented that they were happy that the environmental features on the subject lands were being protected. Comments received on the application. The TRCA's comments related to the environmental impact study and a headwater drainage feature on the tablelands, buffer recommendations, and the limit of development. I'll speak in more detail about this in the next few slides. The TRCA also had technical comments on the stormwater management report and recommended that all environmentally protected lands be secured in public ownership and restored and enhanced for long-term protection. The applicant has worked closely with the TRCA throughout the application review process. Through multiple discussions and revisions made to the limit of development, the TRCA's comments on the application have been addressed and reflected in the proposed zoning bylaw amendment. Durham Region requested the submission of an archaeological assessment, traffic impact study, environmental noise study, and the filing of a record of site condition. All of these requirements have been secured through the proposed holding provision. The region also requested that restrictions be placed on accessory retail sales outlets and employment support uses within the prestige employment zone, which have been implemented through the proposed exception in the draft zoning bylaw. The City of Pickering requested that restrictions be placed on accessory retail sales outlets and employment support uses within the prestige employment zone, which has also been implemented through the proposed exception. Pickering also requested that the applicant submit a traffic impact study prior to approving the zoning bylaw amendment. After the publishing of the staff report, town staff also received a comment letter from the solicitors representing Durham Live. The letter notes that the Durham Live property is zoned to permit major tourist uses, retail uses, residential uses, a casino, and warehouse and logistic uses. Overall, Durham Live has requested that the town defer consideration of this zoning bylaw amendment application until all environmental impacts are fully studied and peer reviewed, and directs the applicant to work with Durham Live on a transportation study and servicing study for the larger area. The letter further states that once the proportionate share of transportation and servicing improvements for the Annandale lands is determined, that those cost-sharing obligations could be included in an approval. As mentioned previously, a joint resubmission was received from Annandale and Crest Point on November 16th, 2020. In response to the comments received by the TRCA, the applicant's resubmission expanded the area to be rezoned environmental protection. The applicant's revised zoning bylaw also removed the request for additional permitted uses and performance standards in the prestige employment zone. A concept plan for a 5-story building with approximately 250,000 square meters or 2.6 million square feet of gross floor area to be used for warehousing, distribution, and offices was also submitted. As I mentioned already, a formal site plan application has not been received by the town to date. The environmental impact study submitted by SLR Consulting evaluates and delineates the existing natural heritage and hydrologic features and required vegetation protection zones and buffers on the subject lands. The EIS confirms the appropriate limit of development for the prestige employment lands and secures for the conveyance of the environmental protection lands into public ownership through the proposed zoning bylaw amendment. The black dotted line as shown on this screen in figure 4 from the EIS is the limit of development as determined through the findings of the EIS and in consultation with the TRCA. All significant features and associated vegetation protection zones and buffers on the property are within the proposed environmental protection zone, including Duffins Creek and the Duffins Creek provincially significant wetland. There were a few natural features on the tablelands, specifically some hedgerows and minor headwater drainage features. These features are not identified on this figure, but are identified on figures 2 and 3 in the environmental impact study. The hedgerows are not features that contributed to the ecological functions on the property, and there was little significance to the minor headwater drainage features, specifically headwater drainage feature 2, as identified in the EIS. Due to the design and grading of the existing golf course lands, the headwater drainage feature 2 functions were found to be limited to intermittent conveyance of surface flow and minor water retention functions. The EIS specifies that through site design and the feature and its functions can be replicated and enhanced. Through consultation with the TRCA, a 1-to-1 ratio of land area compensation has been identified as contiguous to the existing natural heritage and hydrologic features. To further address comments received, staff have revised the applicant's zoning bylaw amendment to place a holding provision on the lands to be zoned to prestige employment in order to secure for certain requirements prior to the ultimate development of the lands. Specifically, as part of a site plan agreement or development agreement, the hold requires the enhancement of environmentally protected lands and conveyance of those lands into public ownership, the submission of a traffic study and implementation of road network improvements, and the filing of a record of site assessment. Additionally, the hold requires the submission of an archaeological assessment and environmental noise study. These requirements satisfy comments from the TRCA and Durham Region. Until such time as an actual development is proposed and a site plan application is received, the implementation of a holding provision to secure for these requirements prior to the physical development of the lands is appropriate. Any subsequent development applications, such as a site plan, will be required to satisfy the holding provisions before the application is approved. The applicant would also be required to submit additional reports and studies that would be identified through the formal pre-consultation and application review process. Staff do not agree with Pickering's comment that a traffic impact study is needed now with the zoning bylaw amendment application, and that a decision on this application needs to be deferred until a traffic study is completed. Further, staff does not agree with Pickering and Durham Live's comments that a decision on this application needs to be deferred until the proportionate share of transportation improvements for the Annandale lands is determined, and that those cost share obligations be included in this approval. Durham Live's comments reference the need for a servicing study for the larger area. However, town staff has spoken with Regional Works Department, who have indicated that the two developments do not impact each other from a servicing perspective, as they are located within two different drainage areas. The reason town staff does not agree that these matters need to be addressed now as part of the zoning bylaw amendment application is that there is no certainty at this point whether the concept plan provided will be the actual development proposed in a future site plan application. Staff would like to clarify that we are not suggesting that Pickering and Durham Live's requests are unreasonable. We agree that a traffic impact study that takes into account the permitted uses on the Durham Live lands is appropriate and required. Staff believe it is not reasonable or necessary to require the applicant to undertake this work for a hypothetical concept plan that may not go forward. At this point in time, the applicant's request is to rezone the lands to bring them into conformity with the town's official plan. Staff are imposing further requirements on the applicant through the holding provision and site-specific exception, which I will speak to next, in order to ensure that the concerns raised by the City of Pickering and Durham Live are addressed prior to the approval of any physical development on the lands. Staff have added a site-specific exception to the prestige employment lands to bring the proposed zoning bylaw amendment into greater conformity with the town's official plan. This exception will implement two development standards, which relate to restrictions on accessory retail sales outlets and employment support uses. This exception addresses comments received from Durham Region and the City of Pickering regarding these matters. Both Annandale and Crest Point are in concurrence with the holding provision and site-specific provisions in the town's proposed zoning bylaw amendment. The figures shown on the screen are an illustration of the boundaries for the existing and proposed zoning on the subject lands. The proposed zoning bylaw amendment with the exact boundaries is attached to the staff report. Through the proposed zoning amendment, the total environmental protection zone lands are proposed to increase from 22.6 hectares or 55.9 acres to 34 hectares or 84.1 acres, an increase of 11.4 hectares or 28.2 acres to be protected. The prestige employment zoned lands are proposed to increase from 7.8 hectares or 19.2 acres to 24.1 hectares or 59.6 acres, an increase of 16.3 hectares of prestige employment zoned lands. As you can see in the proposed zoning on the right, the zoning bylaw amendment does not propose to retain any of the golf facility zoned lands. The proposed zoning bylaw amendment is consistent with the provincial policy statement, the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe, the Region of Durham, and the Town of Ajax official plan policies. The proposed amendment is consistent with the policies of the provincial policy statement, specifically policy section 1.3, as it is maintaining the subject lands for employment uses within a designated employment area. Policy 2.1, as it is zoning the natural features and associated vegetation protection zones and buffers on the subject lands as environmental protection. And policy section 2.2, as it is zoning the sensitive hydrologic features and functions, including their associated vegetation protection zones and buffers on the subject lands as environmental protection. The proposed amendment also conforms to the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe, specifically policy section 2.2.5, as it is rezoning currently underutilized employment designated lands for prestige employment uses. The subject lands are designated employment area and major open space with a regional corridor overlay in the Durham Region official plan, and the proposed amendment satisfies the policies of Durham Region's official plan. The subject lands are designated prestige employment and environmental protection within the Town of Ajax official plan. The proposed amendment is in conformity with the town's official plan. Lastly, the proposed zoning bylaw amendment is also consistent with Section 2A of the Planning Act, which requires municipalities to have regard to matters of provincial interest, including the protection of ecological systems, including natural areas, features, and functions. It is also consistent with Section 3.5 of the Planning Act, which requires municipal decisions to be consistent with the provincial policy statement and to conform to all applicable provincial plans. In conclusion, staff support zoning bylaw amendment Z2/19 to rezone a portion of the subject lands from golf facility zone to prestige employment zone and a portion of the subject lands from golf facility zone to environmental protection zone. Staff also recommend the addition of a holding provision and site-specific zoning exception to the prestige employment lands, as discussed previously in my presentation, to address comments received and to bring the zoning bylaw amendment into greater conformity with the town's official plan. Based on what you've heard tonight and the report you have read, the recommendation of staff is that the proposed zoning bylaw amendment be approved and that the implementing zoning bylaw be provided to council for its consideration at a future council meeting. This concludes my presentation this evening. Thank you very much, Madam Chair and members of council. Staff are happy to answer any questions you may have regarding the presentation or the staff report.
Thank you very much, Ms. Grout. I have a question from Councillor Tyler Moran.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Ms. Grout, for your excellent and thorough report here tonight to us. Obviously, this is very important. It's a sensitive area, and I have to ask, so that, you know, the town has prided itself on being an environmental leader and always protecting ecologically sensitive areas and lands. What did the TRCA, can you speak a little bit of what the TRCA had to say about the environmental study and specifically the limits of development in the zoning bylaw? Thank you.
Certainly, through Madam Chair, the applicant has worked closely with TRCA throughout the application review process. Mr. Steve Heichert, Associate Director of Development Planning and Permits from the TRCA, is in attendance at tonight's meeting, and I will let him further address this question.
Good evening, Council. Through you, Madam Chair and members of Council, thank you for having me today. My name is Steve Heichert. I'm the Associate Director of Development Planning and Permits with the TRCA. This application went through the typical process that one goes through on a site with a number and actually several natural heritage features on it. The whole process started with a site staking where we identified the top of the bank of the valley, as well as a number of the environmental features, including the floodplain on the property, which covers the majority of the natural heritage area, as well as the meander belt of the river. And that's where we look at how the river moves around over time and may possibly cause erosion. We looked at the drip line of the edge of the forest vegetation on the site. And we also looked at, in certain areas, there were quite steep slopes that were associated with the river valley that will erode over time. That's part of the natural hazard component of what we look at. And so all of those things were identified either through study or through a site staking. And the applicant's environmental consultant, SLR, produced the environmental study that was submitted as part of the application. And all of those lines that represent the edges of the natural features and the floodplain were plotted, and the appropriate buffers that are required through the Conservation Authority's policies, as well as the town's official plan policies, were applied. And that resulted in the distinction between the employment designation and the environmental protection designation that's being presented to you today in the bylaw. So we worked very carefully with the landowner and the consultants, and we're very pleased with the ultimate outcome, because all of those features will ultimately, if the bylaw is passed, be put into public ownership and protected in perpetuity in order to meet the relevant policies here. So we were quite pleased with the end result.
Thank you so much. So just to follow up, sorry, Madam Chair.
Go ahead.
So just very quickly, okay, that's great to hear. And so you think that if this was to be built, that, as you said, forever and ever, the environmental impact would be protected and honored, if you will, for years and years to come?
Yes, I mean, there are a number of technical matters that have to be dealt with through the
Sure.
site plan process, like.
It's early, I realize that. Okay, thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you. I have Councillor Bauer next. I've got you all down. You're all on the list.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Ms. Grout, for that very informative and fulsome and very thorough report. I appreciate that. Very interesting. And I also want to thank you for confirming that proper consultation was performed with our Indigenous communities. So thank you for that, for confirming. And my question would be about the buffers. Can you please talk a little bit more, explain about the buffers around the wetlands?
Through you, Madam Chair, SLR Consulting, the applicant's environmental consultant, is in attendance at tonight's meeting, and they can further address this question.
Thank you.
Hi, good evening, everyone. This is Lara DiGregorio speaking on behalf of Crestpoint. I'd like to ask Dale from SLR to help explain that question from Councillor Bauer.
Yes, I'm pleased to do that. My name is Dale Leadbeater. I'm the principal ecologist with SLR Consulting. I was on site with Mr. Steve Heikert, and we had staked the edge, the limit of the provincially significant wetland that is adjacent to the site in the south end. So it's only a portion there. We looked at the attributes of the wetland at that point, where it occurs on the landscape, what kind of vegetation is there, is it very sensitive, what the wildlife habitat is like, do we have breeding amphibians, do we have anything special there that requires an exceptionally large buffer. And we had concluded that, that a 30-meter buffer that has been applied to the wetland was sufficient to ensure long-term protection of wetland functions at that point. And so that was what was applied to the wetland. Now, the interesting thing about that is that there's also a small piece of woodland adjacent to the wetland. So that's on the western extent of the wetland. So you have the wetland down on the floodplain, and then you have this little bit of woodland. Together, the woodland and the wetland are considered to be an area of natural and scientific interest. And so not only was there the 30-meter buffer applied to the wetland, but there also was a 10-meter buffer applied to the area of natural and scientific interest. And so both of those functions were considered and an appropriate buffer applied. And the most conservative, the most extreme protection was identified of all of those features plus a buffer to the floodplain in order to establish the buffer through that area. So we concluded that that was an appropriate treatment in order to protect the wetland and the valley functions in perpetuity.
Wonderful. Thank you very much. That's all my questions, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Khan.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ms. Grubb, for such a detailed presentation. I have a few quick questions. Hopefully they correlate, but what exactly is the relationship between Annandale and Crest Point?
Chair, I will let Lara DiGregorio answer this question. She's representing Crest Point tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you, Caitlin. Good evening, Councillor Khan. Annandale Park Developments are the current owner of Annandale Golf Facility. Crest Point Real Estate Investments has had this land under contract for purchase since much earlier in 2020, and that is our current relationship.
Thank you very much. And to follow up with that, who submitted the concept plan?
May I answer that, Caitlin? Okay, so it was a joint resubmission between Annandale Park Developments and Crest Point Real Estate Investments. It was a joint resubmission.
Great. And that plan, is that what we're going to see developed on that property? You know, can you confirm that?
At this point, it's a concept plan. We understand that employment intensification is a key concept of Ajax's official plan, and we do see this location as being an ideal warehousing and logistics site. So at this point, it is just a concept plan, but something that we believe would work very well.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Madam Chair. That's my questions.
Thank you. Regional Councillor Crawford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I think that most of my questions actually to do with traffic have been answered. I did want to know, I'm assuming that from what I heard, the traffic study will not be done until we actually receive a site plan. Is that correct, Caitlin?
Yes, that's correct, Councillor Crawford.
So how soon after we receive that site plan would you begin that traffic study?
Through you, Madam Chair. So the traffic study would actually be a requirement of the site plan submission. It would be typically we would require all reports and studies to be submitted at the time of formal submission of the application itself.
So so the movement of traffic, whether off of Bailey or Church Street, would be identified at that point. Is that correct?
That's correct. Through you, Madam Chair, we do have the Supervisor of Transportation, John Grieve, on the meeting as well. John, perhaps you can speak to a traffic impact study and the scope of that study in relation to the Church Street and Bailey Street area.
Sure. So through the chair to Regional Councillor Crawford, yes, a traffic study would be submitted at the time of application. And as with any development within the town of Ajax, during the pre-consultation process, staff give the applicant our expectations of the study. We also work closely with them and with the region to set out the terms of reference of that traffic study to ensure that when it is submitted, it is in line with those expectations. So we would expect that that process would begin in advance of their formal submission. And then as Caitlin said, we would expect the complete traffic study to be submitted when they make their first formal submission.
Okay, great. Thank you. Because as you know, I have been well, Rob and I have both had concerns around traffic on Church Street and just the taxingness of that on 2 lanes of road, really. So we are definitely going to be keeping our eye on that. I do have a question around the zoning portion of the road of this section. So in February, it was brought to us to have a section of this zoned as prestige employment. Why wasn't this section included at that time?
Through you, Madam Chair, could you provide a little bit more detail, Councillor Crawford?
Well, it seems that the area that we're zoning now has expanded from where we had looked at it in February, correct?
Through you, Madam Chair, the area that's proposed to be rezoned to prestige employment has always been considered the same relative location. The area to be rezoned environmental protection is the zone that is actually being or having more land added to it. The original application received back in March 2019, the prestige employment lands area has not changed significantly. There have been minor revisions relating to the buffers as discussed relating to TRCA's comments. The original application did not propose to rezone northern portions of the land from golf facility, and the revised submission now proposes to rezone those golf facility lands to environmental protection lands.
Okay, thank you so much. I appreciate that.
You're welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
Mayor Collier, you had a question?
Madam Chair, I have a couple. I just, my understanding is, well, first of all, through you to staff, I just wonder, when was the last municipal comprehensive review done? Please. I believe it was around 2015.
Through you, Madam Chair, this is Stev Andis. The last official plan review that the town conducted was between 2005 and 2010, and all amendments were in effect by 2014.
Okay, so by 2014, these lands had basically been designated prestige employment from golf facility at that time. Just the owner hadn't exercised or submitted the application for a rezoning application to bring it into conformity with our official plan. Is that correct?
These lands in particular were zoned prestige employment. The change during the town's last official plan review on this property was an expansion of the environmental protection designation. But the prestige employment land use designation in the official plan has been there since 2000.
Okay, so this is not new. This is something that has been there for 20 years now. Just as it was operating as a golf course, it didn't make sense at the time to make the change. Now that they're no longer operating as a curling club and golf course, it does make sense now to bring that into conformity.
That is correct.
Okay. We did a Watkins and Associates did a employment land study, an update of that study. I believe it was earlier this year, updating the study they'd originally done in 2009. I assume these lands were included in that?
Through you, Madam Chair. Sorry, through you, Madam Chair, it's Stev Andis again. Yes, these lands were part of the inventory that Watson and Associates looked at when undertaking the employment land review.
Okay, so it was always intended for these lands to be developed. This is no surprise to anybody.
Correct.
And we've accounted for these. So, and my understanding is I think they said we had a very small surplus in employment lands, but that was based on some very, very tight sort of things. And I think through questions, it was realized that it only said we had a slight surplus because we had changed some of the figures. But really, we are very tight on employment land.
Through you, Madam Chair. Yes, the Commercial and Employment Land Review Report only looked to 2041 because we didn't have our revised planning horizon to 2051 at that time. And there was a very small surplus in 2041, approximately 4 years worth of surplus employment lands. However, since that report was published, we have had over 50 acres of employment lands absorbed. So we have had a far quicker absorption in the last year and a half than anticipated.
Okay. I'm just wondering, there's been a lot of talk about the traffic study, and that was stated in also 2 of the letters that we received, or the comments we received. Given that this isn't an actual application, this is a concept, I'm just assuming it wouldn't make sense for the application to do a traffic study now because the use of the land could change to something else, and that traffic study would be useless at that point, just wasted money. Is that the theory behind putting a hold on the property and requiring that at site plan rather than today?
Through Madam Chair, Caitlin Grope speaking. Yes, that is correct. Because there is no certainty at this point whether the concept plan provided will be the actual development that is submitted through a future site plan application. Staff believe that it's not reasonable at this point to require the applicant to undertake that work for something that's hypothetical and not fully proposed at this point.
And thank you, Caitlin. And that's a pretty standard planning policy, right? Putting an H on uh, until we actually know the use, or until the planner knows the use, and then requiring those proper studies at the time. Is that very common?
Through you, Madam Chair, Caitlin Grope again. Yes, a holding provision is a common tool that you can implement through a zoning amendment, through the zoning on a piece of property, which will secure for any number of things. Through the recommended proposed bylaw, we've identified the traffic study to be one of those items.
And I believe that same concept was used, the holding provisions on the adjacent property in Pickering by Pickering Council to regulate. Is that correct?
Through you, Madam Chair, as far as I understand, yes.
Okay. I'm very glad also to hear that we've gone through the reviews with the Indigenous reviews and the TRCA and everybody else. The 2 pieces of correspondence that we received requesting this be deferred, this was sent to everybody on November the 16th, and the TRCA was able to get their comments in. That was 3 weeks ago. Is that about an average amount of time that for circulation?
Through you, Madam Chair, Caitlin Grope again. Yes, 3 to 4 weeks is a typical amount of time for a circulation. There is no, I guess, legislative timeframe for commenting period. The town did send notice of this public meeting in accordance with all legislative timeframes.
Right. And even in the Pickering letter, it actually says that they prefer 3 to 4 weeks. So I assume that's a pretty standard. And given the fact that the region got their comments in, the TRCA got their comments in, the Indigenous groups were able to review. I find it interesting that the city of Pickering would send a letter at the 3-week mark, but not just submit their comments, since that's the time frame they said they needed to give comments. I don't even know if that's actually a question. I just find it very interesting that rather than actually even the lawyer for the adjacent landowner submitted comments. I find it odd that the city of Pickering, given they already submitted comments in July of 2019, are stating they didn't have enough time, and for that reason, even though everybody else got their comments in, they feel this should be delayed. But you're saying that was a reasonable amount of time for comments, and I believe it was, given that everybody else seemed to be able to get their comments in. Is that a fair statement?
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, that's fair.
I'm just, to be clear, because to me, this is a pretty simple task we're doing today. This has gone through, this has been designated, now I found out since 2000, I thought it was through the last MCR process, but since 2000, I assume then it went through the full planning process to be put into the official plan. Is that correct?
Through you, Chair, it would have gone through the appropriate requirements for an official plan review, yes.
Okay, and was approved and has been in effect on our official plan for 20 years. We've received comments in favor from the Indigenous community, from the TRCA, from the region of Durham. This conforms to the provincial policy statement, the Greater Golden Horseshoe policy, the town's official plan, the region's official plan. Is there anything that this does not conform to that we don't know about?
Through you, Madam Chair, there is nothing that we are aware of that it would not conform to.
Okay, I just wanted to just touch on a couple of things. Actually, you know what? I'll save that for my wrap up when we vote on this. Thank you very much, Ms. Endes and Ms. Grobe, for answering my questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Lee, Regional Councillor Lee.
Thank you, Chair. It looks like my questions have been answered, and so I have no question at this time.
Okay, thank you. Are there any other questions, any follow-ups there? So Mayor Collar, do you want to continue with that then?
No, I'll wait till we speak to it at the vote, Chair. I will move it if you like, but are we going to hear from the proponent?
That would be great if the proponent has any comments to some of the questions that have been asked.
Good evening again. This is Lara Di Gregorio speaking. I would like to ask Julius, our planner on file, to speak to some of the background on this application.
Thank you, Lara.
Hello. Yeah, my name is Julius DeRuiter. I'm a planning consultant that I act for Annandale Developments, and I filed the application on their behalf. We're quite pleased with the detail of the submission that was made to committee today. It was quite thorough. The planning report is quite thorough, and just to indicate that we are satisfied with the form and content of the bylaw that's before you and would be pleased to have it passed. As indicated by Laura earlier, Annandale has entered into a purchase agreement with Crest Point. Crest Point is assisting us in going through this process of accelerating the cooperation and work that we have done with the TRCA, and also with producing this modified concept plan that simply is an illustration of how the site could be developed. And I leave it now to Laura, I guess, to follow up on any comments that she may have on behalf of Crest Point.
I have no further comments other than to say thank you for hearing us this evening, and thank you for your efforts on this file.
Thank you very much for attending. Are there any further questions? Okay, I have a motion that the proposed zoning bylaw amendment as provided in attachment 1 to this report be approved, and that the implementing zoning bylaw be provided to council for its consideration at a future council meeting. Comments, questions?
I'll second that. I believe you need a seconder.
Okay. And can I have a mover?
I'll move it.
I believe the mayor moved it, Chair.
The mayor.
I thought I moved it.
Thank you. I missed that. Go ahead, Sean. You had something to say on the motion?
Oh, I just wanted to speak to it at the appropriate time. Thank you very much, Chair. Just to me, this has followed absolutely the full proper planning process, starting back in, now that I understand, 2000, when this was changed in the town of Ajax official plan and the regional official plan. We've heard tonight that this conforms to the provincial policy statement, to the Greater Golden Horseshoe policy, our official plan, the regional official plan. The TRCA is in support. We've got comments back from everybody else, and according to the report, these have all been satisfied. I have no problem supporting this today. I do find it a bit laughable, actually, one of the comments that we received asking for, I'll read it, quote, "The town should also direct the applicant to participate in our client servicing study to determine proportionate share. And once it's determined, service improvements, the subject property of the town will be able to include those cost sharing obligations." We did that. We did that to the whole back and forth that we did with the adjacent landowner for months. And actually, every member of this council that sits on regional council supported entering into the development agreement with the adjacent landowners. So they were the ones that pushed us out. And I just find that laughable that they would try now to request that when we dealt with that a month ago. And absolutely, these things will happen. These will happen as part of the hold. And once there is a proper application on this property, and we go through that site plan application process, part of the provisions as set out in this document, in this report, speak to the things that need to be done to satisfy that holding provision. And I think that our staff and the developer have really done a great job as far as making sure that any concern has been satisfied and those safeties have been put into this holding provision to make sure this is done properly and fully follows the planning process. So I'm absolutely comfortable in supporting this. I will ask for a recorded vote, please, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else? Any further comments? I just wanted to say thank you to staff and to all of the different parties that work together on this. I think this truly does show that the planning process works. We've been, TRCA and the proponents have been working very closely with our staff for quite some time now. And they've done a really tremendous job in the rezoning of this property. And I know that many people are happy to see that they have expanded the environmental protection on these lands. It's always been a very beautiful property and people really love that about it, and they'd like to see it stay that way and see that the Duffins is protected. So thank you for all your hard work on this. I think it's a really great outcome. I think the holding is very important, and we'll see what happens from here. So a recorded vote has been called, Madam Clerk. So I'll call the motion. Well, first of all, I will call the motion, which would help, wouldn't it? Moved by Councillor Collier, seconded by Lee. All in favor? Any opposed?
Madam Chair, we would do the recorded vote at this point.
Thanks, Alex. Couldn't do it without you.
Thank you. On the resolution before committee, please state your position in favor or opposed. Mayor Collier.
In favor.
Councillor Bauer.
In favor.
Regional Councillor Crawford.
In favor.
Councillor Khan.
In favor.
Regional Councillor Lee.
In favor.
Councillor Tyler Morin.
In favor.
Regional Councillor Dies.
In favor. Thank you. The motion is carried, unanimous. So we'll move on to the next portion on the agenda, which is 5.1, the site application for 105 Rossland Road West.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My name is Caitlin Grope. I am also the planner responsible for the planning file submitted by 2613628 Ontario Limited, also known as Katana Developments Inc., for site plan application SP6/20. Tonight's presentation will provide an overview of the background information on the application and an evaluation of the proposal and to recommend Council's endorsement of site plan application SP6/20. The subject lands are located at 105 Rossland Road West and encompass an area of 0.39 hectares, just about 1 acre, 0.96 acres. The previously existing residential dwelling and accessory structure on the subject lands were demolished in October of this year. Surrounding the subject lands are the following land uses. To the north is Rosslyn Road West. Across Rosslyn Road is a stormwater management pond and existing single detached dwellings within the Nottingham and Tormina neighborhoods. To the east are existing street townhouse dwellings along Lax Avenue and Smales Drive. To the south are existing single detached dwellings on Smales Drive, and further south is Fishlock Street, located within the Applecroft neighborhood. To the west are environmentally protected lands associated with Miller's Creek. An existing trail runs north-south along the east side of Miller's Creek. Further west across the creek are existing single detached dwellings on Holmes Crescent. At its May 6, 2019 meeting, Community Affairs and Planning Committee considered Official Plan Amendment OPA 18-A1 and Zoning Bylaw Amendment Z2/18 submitted by Katana Developments to permit a development consisting of 60 back-to-back stacked townhouses within 2 3.5-story buildings on the lands known as 105 Rosslyn Road West. The committee approved both the official plan and zoning bylaw amendment applications and amended the motion to add that staff be directed to bring the formal site plan application and a staff report back to council for approval. The applicant has now made the formal site plan application, being site plan application SP 6/20, to permit the development of 60 back-to-back stacked townhouses within 2 3.5-story buildings. This presentation provides additional background information to inform council on the application. The proposed development is consistent with the policies of the provincial policy statement, conforms to the provisions of the growth plan for the Greater Golden Horseshoe, and is consistent with the applicable policies of the Durham Regional Official Plan. The subject lands are also satisfying policies of the Town of Ajax Official Plan. The lands are designated high-density residential within the official plan and are subject to area-specific policy 6.29, which permits back-to-back stacked townhouses, a maximum density of 154 units per hectare, and a maximum height of 4 stories. Within the town's zoning bylaw 95/2003, the subject lands are zoned residential multiple 6 with an exception 197 and a holding provision. The site-specific zoning permits back-to-back stacked townhouses and establishes the detailed development standards for the site. The subject lands are subject to a holding provision, which can be lifted upon the applicant entering into a development agreement with the town, which includes requirements to complete the construction of Smales Drive, the reconstruction of the 3-meter multi-use trail along Rosslyn Road West across the frontage of the property. The proposed development meets the performance standards as set out in the site-specific zoning exception. The proposal complies with the site-specific official plan policies and site-specific zoning provisions, which were implemented through OPA 18-A1 and zoning bylaw amendment Z2/18 approved at the May 6, 2019 CAP committee meeting. The proposed development includes rooftop amenity spaces and a green space area at the southwest corner of the site, along with bike racks. The development will be accessed from Rosslyn Road West by a 6.7-meter wide private driveway, which accesses a ramp to the underground parking level on the west side of the development. A total of 78 parking spaces are proposed, which includes visitors' parking spaces, as well as 3 accessible parking spaces. Through this development, the existing Smales Drive temporary roadway and emergency access will be closed and replaced with a new 18.5-meter wide public road, which would complete the road pattern in the neighborhood. In addition, the applicant will be required to reconstruct the 3-meter wide multi-use trail along the Rosslyn Road West frontage. At the May 6, 2019 CAP committee meeting, concerns with regard to vehicular access to the site, waste collection, and setbacks from existing southerly and easterly residential dwellings were raised. The report provides additional details regarding these concerns and how they've been addressed in the overall site layout. Specifically with regards to vehicular access, the only driveway access to the site is provided from Rosslyn Road West, located at the west end of the subject lands. No vehicular access is proposed from Smales Drive. With regards to waste management, questions regarding the waste management for the site were raised at the meeting, but since the site plan application had not been submitted at the time of the CAP meeting, the exact details of waste collection had not yet been determined. The applicant has now submitted a detailed waste management report with the site plan application, which details the waste collection procedure and schedule and storage that has been considered and incorporated into the proposed site design. The waste pickup at the site would be privately contracted. Each unit will have a waste storage space located within the kitchen, and a communal garbage room is located between blocks A and B. With regards to the development setbacks, the site-specific zoning that was previously approved set the minimum setbacks for the site. The submitted site plan complies with those standards. The proposed Block A and B buildings are sited in close relationship with the Roslyn Road West frontage to the north of the site, which maximizes the setbacks from the existing single detached dwellings located to the south and east. The location of the buildings on the site allows for at least a 20-meter setback from existing properties to the south. The applicant has submitted the attached conceptual elevation rendering to provide an idea of what the proposed development will look like. The final elevation drawings will be approved by the town's control architect and included within the site plan agreement. At its November 9th, 2020 meeting, the General Government Committee considered a closed session report regarding a land exchange agreement with the applicant for this site plan application, which would facilitate the assembly of the development block to enable the proposed development to be completed, as well as the completion of the road network. The recommendations of the closed session report were adopted in the open session of the meeting, which will enable a bylaw to authorize the execution of the agreement of purchase and sale to be presented to council at its meeting on December 14th, 2020, following 4 consecutive weeks of public notice. Based on what you've heard tonight and on the report you have read, the following recommendations are being provided for your consideration as shown on the screen. Staff are of the opinion that this development will provide a compact urban form within an area of the town that is appropriate for such form of housing and is a development that is consistent with the PPS Growth Plan, Region of Durham and Town of Ajax official plan policies. Therefore, staff recommend that the submitted site plan application SP6/20 be endorsed by council and that staff be authorized to issue final site plan approval. Thank you, Madam Chair and members of council. This concludes my presentation this evening. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
You're muted, Joanne.
Regional Councillor Crawford.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you to Caitlin. Up the street from 105 Roslyn Road, there is a complex that has had a tremendous amount of trouble with cars coming in and making U-turns. So if the only exit is off of Roslyn Road, is it at all possible to have a gate that goes down and up to allow for only residents to come into this complex and not outside residents to come in and make U-turns or anything like that? Is that anything that could be added to this site for that? I know that the site up the street has had problems for years and years and years and have not been able to have it addressed.
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, Councillor Crawford, that's certainly something that we can review through the finalization of the traffic study. We can have the applicant look into that, having a gate that's only for residents. One thing to note with this proposal, the driveway goes directly down into the parking garage. So that's maybe something that might deter people from trying to pull in and turn around. But definitely, I think that's something that can be looked into. If it's not a gate, I believe that proper signage could be provided indicating that, you know, turning into this driveway is private residents only, and that no U-turns are permitted.
Is there any surface parking at all on this site?
Through you, Madam Chair, no, all of the parking is proposed underground.
Okay, so maybe it may not be a problem, but if it's just something that you could look into, it's easier to put it in before than after. That's what we're finding now. Is the turn right turn only, or is it full turn or full movement on Roslyn Road?
Through you, Madam Chair, I believe our Supervisor of Transportation is still on the call, John Grieve. John, would you be able to answer Councillor Crawford's question?
Yes, I can. So the at this time, the access is a full move access. As part of their application, their traffic study submitted showed that that was a feasible solution, or that it could operate appropriately at a full move. So at this time, it's full move access.
I guess we don't see any future light in that proposal.
Through the chair to Regional Council Crawford, there was not a need for a light given the anticipated volumes from this development.
Yeah, no, I'm not worried about the anticipated volumes from the development. I'm more worried about the volumes on Roslyn Road.
Right, through their analysis, considering the volumes on Roslyn Road and the access, or the volumes trying to access this site, there wasn't a need to ensure appropriate operation of this access to signalize it. It could operate at an acceptable level as an unsignalized access.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Regional Councilor Lee?
Thank you, Chair. Through the chair to staff, 3.6.2, the waste management point, it says that during garbage pickup, larger waste storage cans will be wheeled to the waste collection pad located at the street for pickup. I'm assuming the street you mean is Rossland?
Through you, Madam Chair, to Councillor Lee. No, the garbage pickup would take place on Smales Drive. So at the south end of the site. So the garbage truck would come around the back of the development on the south side.
And it would have to make a U-E out, no? Because it doesn't just go, does it make a full roundabout?
No, the Smales Drive through this development, Smales Drive would be the road network would be completed. So there would be a full connection through. Any trucks wouldn't have to turn around. And
it says collection to be twice a week?
Yes, through you, Madam Chair, that's what was identified in the waste management plan.
That's better than what we're getting. We're getting only once a week right now. But I guess my last point ultimately is, parking is always going to be an issue, especially for those residents. I think Regional Councilor Crawford had pointed that out. But my main concern was waste collection, because private collection is always tricky, and I just want to ensure that all residents who buy property here understand that it is going to be private collection and not regional collection, because and I just hope that in all kind of future paperwork it's listed specifically that it'll be privately contracted, because I've said in previous CAP meetings, I have a development on the far west end of Ward 2 where it's private, and it was kind of a buyer beware type situation. So that's my only comment. So thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Tyler Moran.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair, and thank you once again, Caitlin, for your report. So I've got a few questions. 105 Roslyn Road West is very close here to my home. And can you speak to, I was under the impression that this, or I thought we were told before, would be right in, right out. Now you're saying that it'll be a full move intersection coming in, or access, so you can go left or right. My concern is a couple things. So we know that the widening of Roslyn Road is just a matter of time coming. So it's the left turn to go west that's always the challenge. Now, what I'm wondering about is that 60 meters to the west, there's a crosswalk that's signalized right now. So I don't know if it's possible, maybe get back to me to sort of harmonize all that. Because if they pull out and then somebody's going across the crosswalk, you can see, and if there's a center lane, that could get a bit messy. Do you want to comment on that, please?
Sure, through you, Madam Chair, to Councillor Tyler Moran. I will allow John Grieve to provide a response to this. The traffic impact study would have covered off that, but I'll let John speak to that.
Thank you. So through Madam Chair to Councillor Tyler Martin. So yes, the traffic study did look at the operation of the access and did consider the eventual widening of Roslyn Road. And the analysis did show that the left turn could be made safely. You are correct that there is a existing pedestrian crossing to the west of this property. It is a push button activated crossing. So it is only activated when a pedestrian is at that location and activates it. Given the sight lines that do exist on this access. Vehicles exiting this site would have clear sight of that and be able to stop at a activated signal, even while completing a movement. So those considerations have been made.
Okay. May I, Madam Chair, another question? So
Certainly.
Smale, thank you. So I guess, no, sorry. Yeah, Smales on the south side is going to become a proper curbed, clean street. And what we were worried about in the open house and when I talked to a lot of residents is that that's going to become an overflow parking, that whole street, for when they have visitors to their residents. So right now, all the parking is underground. And how many parking spots is there per unit? Is it 1.5, did you say in the report, I believe?
Through you, Madam Chair. Just give me 1 minute here. I don't have the exact number in the report, but I can pull up the previous report, which does identify that. But to answer your question regarding the visitors parking, the local streets, the town's parking bylaw would apply. Anyone could park on those local streets for the permitted amount of time, as identified in the town's parking bylaw. And I believe at the last meeting, we did discuss with the applicants looking at putting up signage, in order to
Okay.
deter people from using that as a visitor's parking. But through the zoning bylaw amendment, we did review the parking rates and determined that they would be sufficient to provide both residents parking and visitor parking in the underground parking.
Okay, so there's 60 units. Is there, the overall number of parking spaces?
Yep, a total of 78 parking spaces are proposed.
It seems tight. Okay, can you speak to snow removal? How will that happen, and who's in charge of that when it snows and there's 3 feet of snow on the ground?
Sure, through you, Madam Chair. The proposed site plan does identify snow storage area. I believe the parking or the driveway entrance to the site, the private driveway entrance, that would have to be contracted privately. On Smales Drive to the south and surrounding area, that would become municipal right of way. So town plows would be plowing Smales Drive.
But you're saying there's a storage area for the snow that the private contractor will plow on
That
on
is
this?
correct.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. I'll leave it at that. Okay. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Mayor Collier.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wonder, through you to Ms. Grubb, has there been any further correspondence from any residents after circulation?
Through you, Madam Chair, no, we have not received any additional correspondence through the official plan amendment and zoning bylaw amendment. All public correspondence and notification was completed, and the main concerns that were received from residents were regarding the vehicular access to the site. Originally, the site plan proposed a second access from Smales Drive, and through consultation with the applicant, they were able to revise the plan to remove that access and to only propose the access from Rosslyn Road.
Okay, great. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Any further questions? Councillor Bauer.
Thank you, Chair. Just going back to waste management, thank you for this report, first of all, Ms. Crow. Waste management, I'm assuming, also includes a recycling and composting program. Is that correct?
Through you, Madam Chair, yes, that would be correct. I believe the waste management plan has identified two stream, being recycling and waste. However, a third stream could be added at a later date. The applicant is here at the meeting tonight as well. Perhaps they can speak to that question after.
Thank you. Great.
Anything further? Okay, so I have a motion in front of me. I think Ms. Grout read most of it, so I don't think we really need to read it again. So can I have a mover and a seconder?
I'm
Councillor
happy to move
Lee?
it.
I got Councillor Lee and Rob Tyler Moran.
Excuse me, Madam Chair, will the proponent be able to speak about that recycling program after this motion? Is that the process?
We can, yes.
Thank
Just
you.
a mover and seconder. And is the proponent here to answer any questions that you might have? Staff out of staff.
Yes, hi everyone.
Thank you.
Jeff Green from Katana Developments. Regarding the waste management, yes, our waste management plan showed 2 streams, but we're happy to look at adding the 3rd as well. There's lots of space in our interior garbage room, and we'll be able to accommodate that. That'll be part of our refined site plan application.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
Are there any other questions for the opponent? Councillor Khan?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Hello, Jeff. If this all goes well for you, when do you plan on breaking ground with this project?
Through the chair, we will be looking at breaking ground in the spring.
And how long do you propose it will take to be completed?
It's about potentially a year.
Quick question: how do you gauge your selling prices for these projects?
Yeah, there's not too many comps in the area, so we look at Pickering and other areas, and the market's actually pretty strong right now for everything in the suburbs, and we find that this is kind of the missing middle type of product. It's more affordable than your conventional townhouses, so we're pretty excited about the absorption here. We feel a lot of people will be excited about it.
Thank you very much, Jeff, and thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Any further questions? Thank you. So moved by Councillor Lee and seconded by Councillor Tyler Moran. All in favor? Any opposed? So it's carried. Thank you very much. So the only other thing I need a motion for is adjournment from the
Bauer.
Crawford.
Thank you. All in favor? Any opposed? It's carried. So thank you for attending this evening's Community Affairs and Planning meeting. So we do have a special council meeting right after this. So I will turn it over to, I assume, Mayor Collier or staff taking over the rest of this.
Why don't we, I will be, thank you, Madam Chair, but why don't we take 5 minutes and come back and
That's
clerk a
fine.
minute to do this. So we'll just have a 5-minute break.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor, we are live.
Thank you, Mr. Clerk. Due to the COVID-19 emergency and requirements for physical distancing, in-person attendance is not permitted at this meeting of council. This meeting will be live streamed for viewing at www.ajax.ca/live. Electronic participation is permitted pursuant to council's procedure bylaw. Do the land, like to call this, 1 second. I'm just looking at the agenda, Mr. Clerk. I don't see the land acknowledgement.
Mr. Mayor, it's in your email attachments for the meeting.
No, I have that. I'm just looking at it in the agenda. There we go. Call this meeting to order. No, it's not there. Electronic agenda, online, call to order and acknowledgement. There we go. Call the meeting to order. I'll read the land acknowledgement. We'd like to begin this meeting by acknowledging that the land on which we gather is situated within the traditional and treaty territories of the Mississaugas, more specifically the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation, signatories of the Gunshot Treaty of 1788 and the Williams Treaties of 1923. This land is and will continue to be home to the Indigenous peoples. Let us acknowledge the mistakes and traumas of the past through authenticity and support truth and reconciliation. Let us engage and celebrate Indigenous communities by being leaders of action in acknowledging the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples and the Truth and Reconciliation Commission's recommendations towards truth and reconciliation. Let us keep these principles close as we continue towards truth and reconciliation and as we move forward with kindness and respect as a community. Does any member of council have a disclosure of pecuniary interest? Hearing none, we have reports, community affairs and planning, moved by Councillor Khan, second by Councillor Lee, that the resolutions of the community affairs and planning committee meeting dated December 7th be ratified. Questions or comments? Hearing none, those in favor? See all hands, that is carried. I have moved by Councillor Dye, second by Councillor Bauer, that bylaw number 52-2020 be read a first, second, third time and passed. Questions on the bylaws? Hearing none, those in favor? Any opposed? That's carried. Confirming bylaw, moved by Rob Tyler Moore and second by Councillor Khan. The bylaw number 53-2020 being a bylaw to confirm the proceedings of the Council of the Corporation of the Town of Ajax at a special meeting held on December 7th, 2020 be read a first, second, third time and passed. Those in favor? That is carried. And finally, moved by Councillor Crawford, second by Councillor Bauer, that the December 7th, 2020 special meeting of the Council of the Town of Ajax be adjourned. Those in favor? I see all hands. That's carried.